The MCU has not always treated its female superheroes particularly well. Black Widow had to wait 11 years before she got her own standalone movie, and only with its 21st installment was a female-led superhero film finally produced. I'm going to make a separate video about the women of the MCU, but for now, it's worth contemplating how we reached the point that a bunch of female superheroes were even permitted to thrive on screen at all in such a traditionally male-dominated genre. Female characters with fighting skills have been around a lot longer than we tend to remember. This didn't mean, of course, that these types of characters were in any way common. Across the entirety of Hollywood's golden age in the 1930s, 40s and 50s, no more than half a dozen action heroines were ever brought to the screen in big-budget A-list blockbusters, and most existed on the periphery of mainstream filmmaking, in serial shorts, B-pictures and on early television. There were, of course, a few exceptions to this general rule. 1950s Hollywood icons Jane Russell and Doris Day, for example, were each cast as sharpshooting cowgirls in the classic comedy westerns The Paleface and Calamity Jane. In 1954, the legendary Joan Crawford triumphed in the first ever all-female OK Corral-style gunfight in Johnny Guitar. A decade earlier, Republic, one of Hollywood's lowest-budget studios, produced a 12-episode serial short, The Black Whip, starring a female Zorro. And in 1952, Irish movie star Maureen O'Hara became one of Hollywood's first bona fide action heroines, outfighting every man she faced in the criminally underrated Three Musketeers sequel, At Sword's Point. And all of this was quite apart from the handful of Tarzan-style jungle girls who appeared intermittently in the serial shorts of these decades, most memorably pin-up Irish McCalla as Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. It would be on television in the 1960s, however, amidst the burgeoning women's rights movement, that the action heroine would finally escape from the margins of Hollywood filmmaking to become a viable protagonist in her own right, albeit one still vastly outnumbered by her male counterparts. The bald figures lay bare the extent of this relative cultural shift. At the start of the decade, there was not a single action heroine on American television. By its end, there had been 8, including such revered figures as the noiresque private investigator, Honey West, Batgirl on Adam West's Batman, and the iconic Emma Peel on the British import, The Avengers. Skilled though each of these heroines were in gadgetry, subterfuge and hand-to-hand combat, none possessed superpowers. Lynda Carter's Wonder Woman in 1975 was the first action heroine to do so. With her heightened abilities, she immeasurably expanded the horizons of the female-led action genre, in so doing becoming the earliest screen ancestor of the superheroines of the MCU. The cultural shift engendered by shows like Honey West and The Avengers in the mid-1960s removed the action heroine from the filmmaking margins and established an environment in which mainstream television producers began viewing such characters as normal and acceptable types of protagonists. That a woman could outwit and outfight a man was no longer treated as either entirely threatening or amusingly unrealistic and thus ripe for satire. Nonetheless, the television action heroines of this era proved a very mixed bag. It was Lynda Carter's Wonder Woman that unquestionably shook up the character and, by extension, the female-led action genre itself. It was not the overall quality of this particular series, but rather the abilities of its heroine that proved game-changing. Before Wonder Woman, male physical superiority over women in real life had provided an alibi that allowed screenwriters to take the easy way out and continue giving primacy to the action heroine's leading man. In the 1950s Western TV series Unequivocally, for example, the show's titular heroine might have been the greatest shot in all the land, but it was her partner, Lofty Craig, who threw all the punches. In the swashbuckler At Sword's Point, the film's heroine, Claire Athos, was unquestionably a master swordswoman, but without her blade, she had lost her only advantage. Even the iconic Honey West and Emma Peel, skilled as they were in hand-to-hand combat, relied upon their leading men to burst through locked doors and battle especially large adversaries. In essence, even when the action heroine was the titular protagonist, she was never portrayed as more than the equal of her leading man as a fighter, and invariably lacked his levels of athleticism and physical strength, thus, to some degree at least, requiring his protection. With the arrival of Wonder Woman, however, such comforting rules no longer applied. Lynda Carter's protagonist was the first genuinely high-profile action heroine to possess superpowers. She was infinitely stronger than any man, could deflect bullets with the bracelets on her wrists, and was essentially invulnerable. With such an indomitable heroine anchoring their show, Wonder Woman's writers were left with no choice but to entirely reimagine the storytelling conceits of the past. Wonder Woman's origins, of course, long predated Lynda Carter's portrayal of the character. She had been the first comic book superheroine, debuting within days of the bombing of Pearl Harbor in December 1941, and was soon battling monocle-wearing Nazis and buck-toothed Japanese caricatures, whilst displaying her patriotic credentials by donning a star-spangled costume and giving plenty of impassioned speeches about freedom and democracy in between cracking skulls. Wonder Woman was really Princess Diana, daughter of the Amazon Queen Hippolyta. In her debut issue, Wonder Woman leaves her home on Paradise Island, adopting the secret identity of dowdy, glasses-wearing secretary Diana Prince in order to defend the free world from the Axis powers. As the character's popularity soared, a host of female imitators duly followed, and by war's end, the superheroine had become an accepted part of the comic book landscape. Over the next 30 years, however, Wonder Woman suffered a long and painful decline. Her authors in the 1950s, in a decade in which female domesticity was once again being valorized, chose to focus upon her love life and emphasize her aspirations as a homemaker. Even worse, their successors in the 1960s responded to the women's rights movement of the era by stripping Wonder Woman of her iconic costume and superpowers, turning her into a pseudo-Emma Peel character in the misguided belief that by making her independent and not dependent on superpowers, they were in fact empowering her. Yet, as innumerable contemporary feminists who had grown up with the original version of the character were quick to point out, such a move simply denuded Princess Diana of everything that had made her special. She was no longer Wonder Woman and had been stripped of all the natural Amazonian advantages that had made her physically and intellectually superior to those around her. As fans pushed for her star-spangled revival, Wonder Woman rapidly developed into an emblem of feminism. A collection of her World War II-era adventures was released by Ms. Magazine in hardcover, with prominent feminist Gloria Steinem contributing an emotive introduction, asserting the relief, the sweet vengeance, the toe-wriggling pleasure of reading of a woman who was strong, beautiful, courageous, and a fighter for social justice. It was this heady brew of increased media coverage, Wonder Woman's comic book revival as the costumed, superpowered heroine of old, and her high-profile attachment to the feminist cause that collectively provided the impetus for Lynda Carter's live-action series in 1975. Wonder Woman's transition to television, however, proved anything but smooth. The ABC network released a movie-length pilot followed by 2 standalone episodes before the series was finally picked up on a weekly basis. It then suffered cancellation after its first season, but, in an unprecedented move, was revived as the new adventures of Wonder Woman by the CBS network, which produced a further 2 seasons, with Lynda Carter still in the title role. The ABC series heavily aligned itself with Wonder Woman's comic book origins, adopting a World War II setting with Nazi saboteurs as the weekly villains. The movie-length pilot followed the exact plot of Wonder Woman's first comic book adventure, in which Major Steve Trevor crash lands on Paradise Island and is nursed back to health by Princess Diana, who accompanies him back to the United States to fight by his side as Wonder Woman, unbeknownst to him adopting the alter ego of his loyal secretary, Diana Prince. Where the series most noticeably succeeded was in keeping its titular heroine at all times firmly in the spotlight. Unlike the relationships between Annie Oakley and Lofty Craig, or Honey West and Sam Bolt, Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor were never really battle buddies in the traditional sense. Across Season 1's 15 episodes, there are only 3 occasions when they fight shoulder to shoulder in the finale, and the rest of the time, Wonder Woman either saves the day on her own, or does so whilst rescuing Steve into the bargain. Princess Diana and her Amazon sisters on Paradise Island are described from the outset as being physically stronger and more intellectually advanced than mortal man, and these attributes were admirably reinforced as the series progressed. Perhaps most memorably, on the latter score, in Episode 8, Wonder Woman effortlessly solves a mathematical equation that had been stumping a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. Similarly, at a more mundane level, in almost every episode, Diana, in her secretarial capacity, calmly and efficiently deciphers the Nazis' plans before confronting them as Wonder Woman, with Steve at best being kept in the loop. In a physical sense too, her writers went to considerable lengths to demonstrate that Wonder Woman was operating on an entirely different plane to her enemies. She is shown deflecting bullets with her bracelets, jumping clean over fences, lifting cars off the ground, rendering firearms useless by bending them out of shape with her bare hands, catching bazooka shells and hurling them back at the shooter, and, in hand-to-hand combat, flinging her attackers across the length of a room using her super strength before ensnaring them with her golden lasso and eliciting the truth from them. Underlying Wonder Woman's eclectic skill set was Lynda Carter's perceptive portrayal of Princess Diana as someone who views ordinary men and women much as adults view small children. Especially in the first few episodes, when the show attempted to play up the culture clash she is experiencing, Diana seems to find everything about the world of man quaint and amusing, from their pathetic exertions when seeking to overpower her in a fight, to their analytical limitations, to their inability to live together harmoniously. Her sense of detachment from and superiority over the mortal world is exemplified by the way in which she bears herself with an overt self-confidence and regality, despite wearing a costume akin to a burlesque dancer. This acting choice of Carter's perfectly suited the character, for it underscored the fact that everyone in the mortal world finds Wonder Woman extraordinary in both deed and appearance, but from Diana's perspective, she is simply doing what an Amazon does. If Wonder Woman's extraordinary powers had the positive effect of enabling her to stand alone at the heart of the action, it simultaneously left her showrunners and writers, from a storytelling perspective, facing the conundrum of what to do with Steve Trevor. In most action heroine material to that point, the heroine's leading man either stole the spotlight from her entirely, or was, at the very least, granted his fair share of independent heroic moments. Since Wonder Woman was endowed with such incredible superpowers, these traditional storytelling techniques were no longer workable. Quite simply, there was nothing Steve could do, even at his most valiant, that remotely compared to Wonder Woman's astounding feats of agility, speed and strength. Moreover, since Wonder Woman was mankind's intellectual as well as physical superior, there was no room even for Steve to be portrayed as the brains of the operation. Consequently, the show's writers, trapped within the confines of traditional Hollywood narrative structures with their active heroes and passive heroines, simply engaged in an implicit gender swap, casting Wonder Woman as the traditional male hero saving the day, and Steve as the inept female battle buddy, denuded of those virtues he ought logically to have possessed in order to allow Wonder Woman to shine. As the most obvious expression of this arrangement, Steve appears far more heroic in exposition than in reality. The audience is constantly reminded that he is a decorated war hero. In episode 2, for instance, the plot revolves around Nazi efforts to frame him as a double agent, thereby supposedly doing irreparable damage to American morale. When practical opportunities for showcasing his heroism arise, however, Steve's modus operandi comprises charging fearlessly into the fray, only to get himself into a predicament requiring Wonder Woman to save him. Steve also falls prey to every single ambush laid for him. In episode 1, he is kidnapped from a taxicab by a trio of Nazi agents. In episode 14, he falls headlong into a booby trap. And in episode 3, in the most pathetic defeat of all for a supposed war hero, he is gassed whilst doing paperwork in his office by a woman masquerading as a cleaning lady who spirits him out of the war ministry in a laundry cart. Indeed, if any doubt remained as to Steve's role as the show's resident damsel-in-distress, 1/3 of the episodes in Season 1 focus upon his abduction as a means of luring Wonder Woman into a trap. If his physical inferiority to Wonder Woman were not enough, Steve is consistently portrayed as easily her intellectual inferior as well. Time and again, having uncovered the Nazis' plans, Wonder Woman, in her guise as Secretary Diana Prince, prompts Steve with the relevant clues until he finally figures it out for himself. The intent, clearly, was to illustrate how supernaturally quick-witted Diana was. The effect, though, was to make Steve appear painfully stupid. What mollified Steve's uselessness was Lyle Waggoner's immense likability as a sort of poor man's Cary Grant. He and Lynda Carter enjoyed terrific romantic chemistry, and Waggoner managed to portray Steve as kind and charming, yet grimly heroic when necessary, as if his constant failures were nothing more than occasional setbacks beyond his control. Moreover, whilst clearly in love with Wonder Woman and won over by her beauty, Steve is equally astounded by her courage and amazing feats of strength, and, very progressively, appears entirely comfortable with the fact that she is his physical superior. Hence, in order to allow Wonder Woman to be the star of her own show, her writers inadvertently rendered Steve Trevor unrealistically incompetent, whilst having him utterly fail, both physically and intellectually, to live up to the standards of heroism supposedly attached to his character. It would take another 2 decades for television writers to begin identifying basic techniques for keeping male protagonists in female-led action fare relevant and interesting, without allowing them to steal the spotlight from the show's female star. Indeed, reinforcing the severity of these underlying structural issues, when Wonder Woman was picked up by CBS following its original cancellation, Lyle Waggoner was recast in his role, this time playing Steve's eponymous son, with the series now set in the contemporary world of the late 1970s. Yet, before long, his character was quietly dropped altogether, illustrating that whichever team of writers was on the job, they were unable to work out how to fit a heroic, albeit ordinary man, into a story in which the heroine possessed superpowers and was entirely self-reliant. The decision taken by Wonder Woman's CBS showrunners to drop Steve Trevor may be considered a straightforward attempt to fix perceived weaknesses inherent to the structure of the original ABC series. Wonder Woman's superpowers unquestionably provided her writers with a serious headache. As the weaker incarnations of Superman over the years have well illustrated, it is not at all easy to make an essentially invulnerable character interesting, since nothing and no one can realistically pose a threat to them. William Moulton Marston, Wonder Woman's original comic book creator who had penned all of her wartime adventures, had circumvented this issue by inventing the universal rule that if Wonder Woman's bracelets were chained by a man, she would instantly lose her super strength. This salacious plot device was obviously unworkable for a television series actively courting female viewers in a feminist age, and Wonder Woman's ABC writers wisely adopted the much simpler solution of making their heroine's magic belt the key to her super strength. There proved little continuity on this point, however, and, as the season progressed, the Nazis' ability to relieve Wonder Woman of her belt came to depend entirely upon plot convenience. When the series transferred to CBS, its writing staff, clearly likewise concerned about its protagonist's invulnerability, adopted a vastly different and altogether disappointingly short-sighted strategy, choosing to marginalise Wonder Woman and focus instead upon her much less formidable alter ego, Diana Prince. Diana became the true star of the show, cast as a professional spy in the Honey West mould, yet one who proved barely capable of defending herself in a fight until she had spun around in a circle and transformed into Wonder Woman. The CBS series thus effectively became the adventures of Diana Prince P.I., with the twist that as the climax of each episode approached, or whenever she found herself in a life or death situation, Diana enjoyed the helpful advantage of transforming into Wonder Woman and saving herself. In so doing, rather like the Emma Peel years of the Wonder Woman comic book, CBS's conception of the character robbed Diana of everything that had made her special, facilitating long-winded storylines that could have been resolved in half the time had Diana simply undertaken her missions as Wonder Woman from the start. Beyond issues of narrative structure, undoubtedly the most significant factor in shaping the overall tone of the series, certainly in its ABC incarnation, was its writing team's evident desire to positively engage with the ideals of second-wave feminism, very obviously with an eye towards winning over younger female viewers. The problem was that Wonder Woman's almost exclusively male writers clearly didn't understand what feminism actually entailed. From her very first episode, Wonder Woman develops a penchant for cringeworthy diatribes, clearly intended as feminist messaging. When she confronts the chief Nazi villain in the climax, for example, we get this.
No one can stop this mission, least of all, a woman.
You obviously have little regard for womanhood. You must learn respect.
Earlier in the same episode, after defeating the chief female Nazi, Wonder Woman sanctimoniously informs her,
"The Nazis don't care about their women, and any civilization that does not recognize the female is doomed to destruction. Women are the wave of the future, and sisterhood is stronger than anything."
These painfully superficial slogans continued throughout the first season. In episode 2, after capturing the titular Nazi villainess, Wonder Woman scolds her that she should take time to reflect and learn from her unwomanly mistakes. In episode 3, having herself been captured by the Nazis and interrogated with her own lasso of truth, Wonder Woman defiantly informs her captors,
On Paradise Island, there are only women. Because of this pure environment, we are able to develop our minds and our physical skills, unhampered by masculine destructiveness.
And in episode 4, Diana reassures a despondent middle-aged woman that it's unfair to judge herself by the criterion of age, opining that a vibrant, intelligent woman is much more than the sum of her birthdays. If this type of dialogue had been toned down and integrated in more nuanced fashion into the plot of each episode, ABC's Wonder Woman might well have succeeded in stamping its feminist credentials. Sadly, for all their apparent good intentions, the show's predominantly male writers all too often failed to marry their feminist monologues to the on-screen behaviour of their female characters. To cite the most obviously tone-deaf example, Diana's perfectly valid assertion about women being more than the sum of their birthdays is made in an episode in which she goes undercover as a beauty pageant contestant. Moreover, throughout the episode, she appears genuinely charmed by the sexist banter of the comedian emceeing the pageant, who converses with all the contestants entirely in old-fashioned pick-up lines and sexual double entendres. Additionally, the episode ends with Wonder Woman herself winning the pageant and accepting a victory bouquet in front of an audience full of wolf-whistling GIs to whom she winks seductively as she struts the stage. Only in episode 3 did Wonder Woman's writers, in some measure, succeed in integrating their feminist messaging into the plot. Undoubtedly the best remembered and arguably the best written episode of the entire 3 seasons, the plot revolves around a Nazi plan to capture Wonder Woman and bring her back to Germany so that the Third Reich may learn her secrets and use them to their advantage. The entire scheme is conceived, planned and executed by a committed female Nazi, Fausta Grabels, described in introductory exposition as the star German athlete of the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Wonder Woman, to some extent, becomes a passive, subsidiary character in this episode, which largely focuses upon Fausta's battle of wills with Colonel Kesselman, the ranking officer on the mission. At every turn, Fausta's genius as the Nazi Wonder Woman is reinforced. She abducts Steve Trevor as bait, then allows Wonder Woman to overpower her minions, enabling her to assess her adversary's strengths. Upon learning that Wonder Woman's golden lasso forces those bound with it to tell the truth, Fausta lays a cunning trap which ultimately results in Wonder Woman being ensnared in her own lasso and forced to reveal the secret of her super strength. Yet, from the moment Fausta returns to Germany with her powerful captive, she is faced with Kesselman's disdainful treatment of her, his refusal to listen to her ideas, and his misogynistic contempt for both her and Wonder Woman, which causes him to refuse to believe his prisoner's belt and lasso are magic. Even when Fausta demonstrates its power, he scoffs derisively that an island of women would not last a week. Indeed, it is his own bumbling idiocy, petulantly hurling Wonder Woman's belt at her, enabling her to catch it and regain her strength, that makes possible her eventual escape. Yet the blame for this is laid upon Fausta, who finds herself going to inordinate lengths to recapture her quarry. All the while, Wonder Woman persistently tries reasoning with her.
Fräulein Grabels, you are a woman of great intelligence and should not be taking orders from that man.
Later, having escaped, Wonder Woman tries again.
You were right all the time, Fräulein. Why do you listen to him now?
Only in the climax, when Wonder Woman, having been recaptured, defiantly declares,
If I speak, it will only be to the woman who captured me.
and Kesselman responds by trying to have Fausta arrested and framed for treason, does she finally perceive the error of her ways. By episode's end, she has helped Wonder Woman escape and has been declared an example to women all over the world who want to be free. It seems abundantly clear that Wonder Woman's ABC writing staff deliberately sought to craft a series that would appeal to young feminists, yet it seems equally obvious that their predominantly male writers were unsure of precisely how to go about it. As a result, they inadvertently undermined their own efforts by inventing dialogue that comprised little more than superficial catchphrases which implicitly glorified women for their supposed purity, pacifism and solidarity, rather than focusing upon the harsh realities of gender inequality and how to combat it. Only in the Fausta episode does the writing attempt to show rather than tell, demonstrating incrementally, through Fausta's learning curve about the realities of Nazism, how women can be systematically manipulated, undermined, unfairly treated, and outright bullied when faced with male bosses who maintain a boys' club mentality and fundamentally hold their female employees in disrespect. Wonder Woman, in both its ABC and CBS incarnations, has not aged particularly well. Its plots were unoriginal, its dialogue uninspiring, and its characters superficial. Nonetheless, Lynda Carter and Lyle Waggoner did their best with the material provided, and Carter especially succeeded in granting Wonder Woman a quiet strength and dignity that her scripts hardly merited. In some ways, the series proved a definite step in the right direction. Most obviously, to return to our central thesis, although primitively choreographed, one may perceive in Wonder Woman some of the earliest forerunners of today's CGI-heavy, superpowered battles of the MCU, in which a single punch or throw will send an attacker flying across a room, allowing feats of super strength to become highlights in their own right. Certainly, no misguided attempt was made to limit Wonder Woman's powers. Indeed, her physical and intellectual superiority over the mortal world was consistently emphasised, and the series was undeniably one of the first mainstream action shows whose creators were as determined to win over female viewers as male. At the same time, however, Wonder Woman was very much a product of its day. Its writers, having made their heroine entirely self-sufficient, struggled to find a place for any other characters in her universe, whilst remaining trapped within the traditional narrative conventions of the action genre, in which leading ladies existed purely as love interests and damsels in distress. With Wonder Woman so formidable, Steve Trevor was left to fill this void. Moreover, further reinforcing the narrative issues caused by Wonder Woman's super strength and self-sufficiency, CBS chose to marginalise its heroine altogether and instead focus upon her non-superpowered alter ego. It should be emphasised, of course, that the problem here was not the extent of Wonder Woman's powers. Rather, it was the inability of her writers to figure out how to effectively incorporate them into the story. These days, there are plenty of superheroines possessing all sorts of outrageous abilities, and despite a certain section of male action fans claiming that all modern female superheroes are rubbish, this is blatantly not the case. For every Rise of Skywalker or Madam Web, there have been dozens of well-written action heroines who have appeared over the past decade, from Katniss Everdeen to Furiosa, Jessica Jones, Jyn Erso, Agent Carter, Winona Earp, Sarah Lance, Black Widow at her best, pretty much every female character in the Black Panther films, and the new and improved cinematic Wonder Woman in 2017, to name but a few. Placed against this broader historical context, Lynda Carter's Wonder Woman must be considered a clear-cut success and a huge stepping stone along the road to the MCU, for it sought to portray a strong and virtuous female protagonist in a genre whose male dominance at the time was taking on increasingly ugly undertones. If you enjoyed this content, I'd recommend checking out my new book, Hollywood's Women of Action, From the Perils of Pauline to Wonder Woman, which examines the development of the action heroine as a character from the silent screen era to the present day. It's available from Amazon and other international booksellers. To purchase, follow the link in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.